But we're going to kind of wrap up Judges today, talking about shibboleths. I don't know if you've realized this yet, but I'm a little bit of a weird person. In fact, this morning, the sound team and the music team got to hear the story of the three bears and the big bad Boeing, because I had to say something during sound check, and I just kind of started riffing, and then went really weird really fast, and then kept going. The first amen I've gotten preaching. That's so appropriate. And some reason, shibboleth as a concept, and just it's a fun word, really grabbed me several years ago. And so the entire reason we did a sermon series on Judges was because I kind of wanted to do something on shibboleths, and now we're here. But first I want to tell you guys a little story that does hopefully not involve bears. So a couple years ago, I was talking to a coworker. This is in about 2020, right before COVID. And we were talking about the whole thing of using they and them as pronouns for a single person for whom you don't know their gender, or they prefer to be not referred to by gendered terms. In other words, somebody who says saying he or she, they want to be referred to as they or them. And perfectly honest, this drives me totally nuts. And I'll explain why in a second. But I said that to this coworker who was a very liberal person, a very lovely person, very nice. And I could see her whole face just shut down because she'd immediately pigeonholed me as a bad person who, hates various other types of people. And then I explained to her the reason, and it's because English is already a messy enough language. I do not understand why you is the second person singular for one of you, and all second person plural for many of you. Especially when we have a perfectly serviceable y'all. Texas, you're welcome. And I don't like intentionally putting any more ambiguity into the English language. It has absolutely nothing to do with the underlying issue of people and gender and all that stuff, but absolutely about English is just already messy enough. And she actually was an English major in college. I knew this already. And she 100% agreed with that. And I could actually see her shift gears in her head and go, oh, okay, you're not a bad person. And that really stuck with me because she had used wanting or not wanting they, them as a shibboleth, as a reason to make a snap judgment and draw all these other conclusions around it. And it turned out she was wrong. And I love shibboleths because of that. And the problem is, I think right now, okay, hang on. I almost asked my lovely wife to bring a spray bottle, like with the cat, don't do it. Because this sermon has a real risk of diving into politics in a way that's not going to be good. So if she comes up and does a flying tackle from stage right, that's what's going on. Or throw a knitting needle from the audience. But we do live in a very judgy time. We live in a time where there's a lot of snap judgments about people, about, oh, you think that? Well, you must be this horrible thing. Or, oh, you don't like the thing I like or don't 100% support it. You must be terrible and must be against it. And it's really weird to live in this time in this country where you have to kind of constantly watch what you're saying because what other people are going to conclude may be right, probably wrong, because we also live in this weird world of argument by parity. And for me, the best example of this is, in fact, a Star Wars example. As you guys remember, Star Wars originally, George Lucas made 3 movies and made 3 more, and then we have the sequel trilogy recently after Disney bought it. Actually, not that recently. Golly, I feel old. And a lot of people dislike the sequel trilogy. I dislike the sequel trilogy because I honestly do not like the fact that the story is all over the place and it breaks a lot of the lore of Star Wars. There's things that it introduces that honestly shouldn't be there based on previous material. There's a contradiction baked in. That has absolutely nothing to do with the acting, I don't like a bunch of the directing either. With the acting, or with any of the choices being made, any of the themes of the stories, is really about, I just don't like how it was written. And some of the choices made as far as Is this possible or not in the world? And most people who publicly say that get accused of being sexist, racist, etc., because of the defenders don't want to argue about that. They want to argue about other stuff, which is indefensible. They don't want to argue about things that they may have done wrong that could be maybe proven wrong. They want to argue about things that are not in play, but it makes the arguers cannot defend against it. Even though, if you think about it, most of the people who don't like the sequel trilogy, they dislike it for things that do disservice to the female lead or the people of color who are the leads/supporting actors. So it's also a little bit not contradictory, but it's very much a shibboleth thing. Oh, you don't like the sequel trilogy? You must not like black people because of John Boyega. Oh, you don't like it? You must not like strong female characters because of Daisy Ridley. No, I just don't like bad stories. And that's a shibboleth in action. And we're going to talk about those today. But first, we're going to do a quick recap on Jephthah for two reasons. Number one, it's been a couple weeks, and we had an excellent sermon in the middle. You hopefully have forgotten about mine. But also, I made a little bit of an error I want to walk back. So last week, we talked about Jephthah. And remember, he was exiled from Gilead because of his half-brothers. He had fought the Ammonites as a judge. And as part of that, he made a vow to sacrifice the first thing that greeted him when he got back from a victory, which happened to be his daughter. I'm going to turn this fan off. It's driving me nuts. And, in this moment of weakness, his daughter backed him up and said, yes, you have to do this. You made a promise to God, but give me 2 months to go out with my friends and celebrate. And then she was sacrificed. And the thing I want to walk back is talking about the actual sin that Jephthah did, because I don't think I did a good job explaining it. The sin here was the idea of he had made a sacred vow to God, which is a godly thing, but it was to at least potentially do human sacrifice, which is very much a non-godly thing, a sinful thing. So the sin of that vow was mixing the godly and the ungodly in a way that you just shouldn't do. God stuff should be God stuff, and everything else is sin stuff, and that's it. And because Jephthah made a sacred vow to perform a sin, that's where it all got weird, and we got that unfortunate tragedy. So, wanted to say that. But here's where we are. This all has happened. The way the story is structured, this is post-sacrifice. So his daughter is now dead, and the Ephraimites show up. You may remember back in Judges 8 with Gideon, Ephraim did the exact same thing. The judge calls for the Israelites to rise up, throw off their oppressors. They win this great battle. And then afterwards, Ephraim comes up and says, well, why didn't you let us do a bunch? What's your problem here, man? Don't you like us? Aren't we all fellow Israelites? And in Gideon, it says they challenged vigorously, which I kind of feel like the bully in the bar, what's your problem, man, sort of thing. Here, they walk up and say, hey, we're going to burn your house down around your ears, which is a little bit of an escalation. But also, it's really violent. Why didn't you come out to get a bunch of our guys killed fighting with you? If you don't give us a good answer, we're going to kill you, is just completely disproportionate. At worst, they didn't treat the Ephraimites well, but it's not worth getting killed over. And remember, he lives way, way, way northeast of Ephraimite territory. In fact, if you look at a map, there we go. Over here, the deep red line, that kind of lighter, or that kind of greener green, that's Ephraimite territory. It's right there. And then right above them, and then across the river above them, that's underlined in that light blue, that's all of the East Manasseh territory. And off the map up to the right is where Jephthah lived. So the Ephraimites called out all of their army, all their guys, marched out to his house, way, way up in Manasseh, and then said, what's your problem, man? Which is, hey, you went way out of your way to lodge a complaint. They did actually have messengers and things, if you really want, put a comment in the box sort of thing. But that's what he did. But that's what they did. And the thing you have to understand about this is a little bit of the tribal structure going on here. And that is that amongst the children of Jacob, we have our children of Leah and our children of Rachel. And the concubines or the servants kind of fall in under those parents. But, and out of all of that, Joseph gets like the prime spot because he's Joseph. He was the favorite son, and because God likes doing this thing where we have siblings, or especially twins, and the younger one is above the older. We see it a ton of times in the Bible, not least Jacob and Esau. And with there's a lot of similar names in the Bible. With Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, Manasseh's the older one, Ephraim is the younger one. When it comes time to bless them, though, flip back off full screen, Antha. I gave Antha instructions on how to deal with the map, and now I'm changing them, so that's not her. The screen was totally my fault earlier. So he's supposed to bless Manasseh, the older one, with his right hand, Ephraim, the younger one, with his left hand. And Jacob does this. He switches hands. And Joseph's going, nope, and he grabs Jacob's hand to put it back on the right child, the correct child. And Jacob says, no, it's not going to be that way. Ephraim is going to be the primary of these two. And then through Israelite history, from the kings and down, when we have Judah and Israel, the divided kingdom, Judah is called Judah because it's really the tribe of Judah and kind of Benjamin and Simeon. Israel could the same way be called Ephraim. Ephraim is the leader by far of these tribes, of the northern tribes, of the non-Judah tribes. And some other places in the Bible, you will actually see Ephraim used to refer to the nation or the kingdom of Israel, specifically because of that level of prominence. So what's going on here is that Ephraim is saying, we're supposed to be in charge. You didn't even call us out, you jerk. You're trying to undermine us, and therefore we're going to make an example of you. Which Ephraim's not supposed to be in charge. Yeah, they're supposed to be wealthy and blessed and do well, but they're not supposed to be in charge. God's supposed to be in charge. That's how he set these things up. And so Ephraim is trying to act like the Ammonites did. Because remember, the Ammonites had conquered the Moabites and that suzerainty thing where they're in charge, they're not officially in charge. Ephraim's trying to do the exact same thing. Oh, yeah, you're a separate tribe. Oh, yeah, you're in charge of your stuff. It's just we're in charge of you in every way that counts. So we're seeing Ephraim acting like the Ammonites. And that parallel is absolutely supposed to be here. Because the very next thing that Jephthah says is what he said to the Ammonites. Why do you want to fight me? Literally, that's what he sent the Ammonites. It's what he says to the Ephraimites here. And he's calling them out. And the other thing he says is, and by the way, when I did call for troops, you guys didn't show up. You weren't here. But now the fighting's over, you're all complaining and arguing and making trouble. And so we also see this kind of the Moabite claim that the Ammonites were doing that really was the Amorites from 2 weeks ago. This kind of idea of I'm making a play for power, but it's really, really made up justification. Ephraimites are doing the same thing. But then the big difference that we do see is in the parallel to Gideon. Because remember, Gideon was timid. Gideon had trouble getting going and actually being bold. And he got over that, but then he did kind of walk it back a little bit with the Ephraimites when they confronted him. He's like, hang on. Can I have my little victory? Because you Ephraimites had such a big victory when you killed all the guys who were running away. Can I have my little victory, please? And he kind of assuaged their egos. Jephthah, whose daughter he's just had to kill, is not going to play that game. He just calls them on it. Look, I know what your problem is. I called you didn't show up. Now you're here bringing trouble. And oh, golly, this looks a lot like the Ammonites. And so Ephraimites are quite upset. And they, in fact, make a really interesting argument. And the other reason we have the map, can we go back to full screen, is look at how connected and how close everybody actually is here. On the bottom left, we have Judah. That's more or less the southern border of the Promised Land. Up there, we have another, on screen, it's going to be on this screen, it's another couple feet of real space. If you're looking at a computer screen, another inch or two maybe, for some of the northern tribes. But this is all the tribes, more or less. And they are all next to each other. They're all one pseudo-political unit together. No one's run off. No one is seceded or is trying to be separate. But what the Ephraimites say is that those Gileadites, everybody on the east side of the Jordan, they're renegades from Ephraim and Manasseh. You're a bunch of breakaways. You're a bunch of Confederates, if you're in the U.S. history world. And that's an accusation. And it's also you're not following God anymore. It was a big accusation. And at that point, it's just kind of on. There's going to be a fight. But again, we want to see this Ammonite kind of style claim to be trying to get land and fighting. Okay, make sure I didn't miss anything important. Yes, okay. The problem with doing your slides and your script revisions to the last second is you occasionally get turned around, and I unfortunately was doing revisions every time. So Jephthah does have to fight the Ephraimites. And it's really interesting when you compare this description as opposed to any of the other judges' descriptions. They do fight the Ephraimites. The Gileadites win, and the Ephraimites run. Oh, I probably should do the back again, actually. Run back across. This thing is backwards. Run back across the border. So if you look at on the map again, Gad, which is right there and kind of in the middle. Probably what happened was Ephraim was somewhere in Gad or maybe East Manasseh, and they're trying to get back across the Jordan River to Ephraimite territory. And the Gileadites capture all of the crossings. Now, with Gideon, Ephraim had captured all the crossings before the bad guys could get across to the east side of the Jordan. So a little bit of a turnaround here. They capture the crossings, and every time somebody who looks like they might be running away shows up, they capture him and say, "Are you an Ephraimite?" And if they say yes, bad things happen. If they say no, then they point at either an ear of corn or the water, or the flood waters, because it's the same word, and say, "What's that?" And if the person says, "It's a Sibboleth," well, they have an Ephraimite accent. They're Ephraimites. They get killed. If they say Shibboleth, they have a Gileadite accent. They're a good guy. They're let free. And that's what a Shibboleth is. It's a minor difference used to make a big snap judgment. And if you say Shibboleth or Sibboleth, you lived or died. And the Bible says that 42,000 of the Ephraimites were killed that day, which is a lot. But what it doesn't say is what it says all the other bouts, the Ammonites, Moabites, etc., of God gave them into whomever's hands, into the winner's hands. This is not God making one side win. This is a completely earthly conflict. And when you think about it, all the Gileadites, they're from the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Gad, the tribe of Manasseh, and they're killing their fellow tribe members, Ephraimites. We're not supposed to have Israelites killing Israelites here, just bad guy foreigners, not good guy literal cousins. And also, the Ephraimites are kind of right when they said they were a breakaway. It takes a lot of no contact for your accent as a people to shift. So over the course of a couple hundred years, that accent actually shifted quite a bit. And that's a little weird, because they started off as one homogeneous unit walking across the desert and conquering, and they should have had a bunch of back and forth across the river. I mean, the Levites certainly did, but they were separate enough that the language has shifted at least a tiny bit. So in some ways, the Ephraimites aren't wrong. They're the bad guys in the story, but they're not wrong. But anyhow, the rest of the story goes that Jephthah, he judged Israel, not just Gilead, but the entirety of Israel for 6 years. And then Jephthah the Gileadite was buried in Gilead. So he stayed a Gileadite as his identity till the end. If you want to think about it this way, think about it in terms of person who is a Texan, and they fight against the Mexican invaders, who are the Ammonites in the story. And then New York comes over and causes trouble, and they kill them trying to cross the Red River back because they don't say y'all correctly. And then Jephthah the Texan was buried in Texas, even though he ruled the country for 6 years. That's how the story's supposed to play. His identity is not an Israelite, but this subsection stayed and was very much part of it, which again is not what God wants. God doesn't want this separation. He wants the tribes to all work together. And we actually see the next 3 judges kind of focus on unification, kind of focus on erasing these differences in the tribes. The next guy, Ibzan, he has many children, and he marries outside of his clan. He brings in wives for his sons from other clans, and he marries his daughters to members of other clans. Marriage alliances is very common, a very strong way to bring different groups together. The next guy is named Elon. It doesn't really say what he does, so I'm assuming he just went and colonized Mars. And then the next guy is Abdon, and he's an Ephraimite. So we went from the Ephraimites getting killed to now one of the next judges is explicitly is an Ephraimite. So we're kind of seeing this thing. And so based on all of this kind of weird coda to an already weird, disturbing story of Jephthah, what are we supposed to take away from it? And I think what we're supposed to take away is that shibboleths and tribalism are usually wrong. And we'll talk about the usually in a second. The idea that we are dividing ourselves up over unimportant things is something that, as Christians, we should absolutely not be doing. And absolutely not be doing. Because if you look at, for example, what does the Great Commission say? Matthew 20:19. Go and make disciples of all nations. Not all nations except those bleep, 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 bleep Texans. No, everybody. We're not making divisions. Or Paul, 1 Corinthians 9:19, talking about how he talked and how he goes and reaches out. I become all things to all people. So by all possible means, he's not going to let the differences get in the way. He's going to adopt the difference if he has to. He's going to come down to Texas and say y'all. He's going to go out to California and eat avocado toast. Whatever it has to do to get people to listen, he's going to do it as long as it's not sinful. Sorry, brain stopped for a second. And the reason being that people, or at least the sin nature people, we are inherently tribal. I mean, think about primitive people, Bushmen, Amazon tribes, things. They break out to about 100 people, little groups of about 100, 120. If you look at the military, the size of the platoon, the kind of the basic unit of military is 120 people, because we are wired in our brains we can remember about 120 people in our close group. And after that, they are somehow other. So we will naturally break to 100-person groups, our little tribes. That is how human beings are wired. And you have to do some real effort to get anything bigger than that. And that real effort can be, gosh, I've conquered you and now I'm in charge. It can be, we got a bunch of people together to make a constitution. Here are the rules so that we don't have problems. But without some external force or an internal force like morality acting on people break to 100-person groups, our little tribes. And even when we have those external things, even when we have a constitution, the Constitution of the United States is a revolutionary document. It is totally insane when you think about how it worked. We're going to have a king, and we don't like this whole king idea, and we've had this kind of whole 300 years of religious wars, so we're just going to decide to be a group, and we're going to decide to give up some power and keep some power, and it's going to actually work for 200 plus years, which generally doesn't happen. The French Revolution, a couple decades later, that thing ended in blood and tyranny within a decade, and it was the exact same experiment. So it's weird that I should have sent her a spray bottle, clearly. It is a thing that we're gonna do this thing. We're gonna do this thing where we break into groups. And even in those individual groups, you read about early American history, there was a very real risk of a trade war between Virginia and New York and Massachusetts. We just fought a war to throw off tyranny, but hey, now it's my turn to do some tyranny against my neighbors. Or the French Revolution, which let's see here, started off as basically a people's revolution, then became the Reign of Terror, where we kill everybody we can get away with. And then the Reign of Terror itself, Robespierre, the head of the revolution, himself was guillotined. And then, as he's known, General Grapeshot, Napoleon Bonaparte, takes power and starts a giant war of invasion. In all those cases, like, oh, the aristocrats, they're evil. We have to kill them. Oh, you're not sufficiently revolutionary, Robespierre. We have to kill you. Oh, you're the mob. Napoleon, kill those people. Oh, you're Austria, England, Spain, everybody else. We're going to invade you when they're France. We always break the world into my group, mine, everybody else. That's how we're wired. But that's not how we're supposed to be wired. Because that's the sin nature. That's the thing that we're not supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be doing the godly thing, like go make disciples of all nations, not everyone you like, not just your 100 closest friends who are in your tribe, but everybody. And the thing is, we, as sad little apes, which we are, can find all sorts of ways to make up divisions if we don't have them. And I'm going to use an example, and it's gonna be kind of hard, but I really want to use it. I think it makes a really good point. How many of you know about the Citizens United decision from the Supreme Court? It's from about 10 years ago. Okay, raise your hands. I see John nodding. Okay, this is the one where if you read the criticisms of it, we gave corporations the right to free speech and to spend unlimited money on elections. Now is it ringing a bell? Okay, that is the most dumbed down, inaccurate description of that decision. And as an attorney, because I actually am a licensed attorney, it blows my mind that that's the takeaway, because it's so complete. It's not just wrong, it's like super wrong. You have to invent a new word to describe how inaccurate that description is. And the reason being that corporate personhood is not a new thing. It didn't come out of nowhere. The free speech thing already existed, because corporate personhood is basically, it's an administrative tool to make it easier to deal with corporations and let the people exercise their rights through them. So for example, if you're trying to sue a corporation, well, if you're going to sue, say, Boeing, do you really want to sue every single owner and officer of that corporation? No, that would be ludicrous. It would be ridiculously expensive. So we treat the corporation as a person, and you can just file one lawsuit against one corporation and get the whole group. Or let's say you're a group of people, you want to make a mean, nasty documentary around your political opponent, but you want to be anonymous because that person has a little bit of a reputation. So you form a corporation, and you can maintain your anonymity and perform political speech, extremely protected, and the corporation is the only thing that the public sees. That's very normal. And yes, your corporation has free speech. Really, you, the members, have the free speech. You're just using the corporation to exercise your right. Does that sound kind of reasonable, that last one? That's the fact pattern of Citizens United. Citizens United was making a massive documentary about Hillary Clinton. They wanted to do it anonymously, and there was a rule saying if you're a corporation, you could not perform any political speech within 60 days of an election. Individuals could, just not a corporation. But because the individuals are acting through the corporation, the entire law actually is unconstitutional. Now, I made that sound really simple, and I did my own little shibboleth right there. So let me make sure I'm being honest with you guys. There's a bunch of other reasons to not like Citizens United. There's the distorting effect of corporate money, because some corporations have a lot of money. The anonymity issue, maybe you do or don't want people to be anonymous when they're making political speech. There are some limits around campaign coordination, and there's some kind of traditional news media versus bloggers, new media, and also just the people as the press. So it's actually a complicated issue too. But when you think about the criticism, the shibboleth of, well, that horrible decision did this thing, well, no, it didn't. And it's a big, complicated issue. You have to weigh a lot of different factors. But it's a really handy way to divide us, isn't it? Oh, you like Citizens United? You horrible, horrible, racist, terrible Republican. Oh, you're against it? You must be a Democrat or a liberal or progressive. It's a really nice way to divide, even though it took me 20 minutes of thinking about it and then another 10 of actually talking to semi-accurately describe what happened and the issues. But in a sentence, we can divide each other. That's the shibboleth. Or let's talk about religion, the other fun third rail. Think about it this way. 95+% of Christian doctrine, no matter what denomination you're talking about, is 100% absolutely identical. I can walk into a Catholic church, into a Lutheran church, to a Methodist church, to a Baptist church, into a Church of Christ, whatever, and 95% of the time, I will absolutely, without even thinking about it, agree with what's being said. That 5% has some big stuff sometimes, but the vast majority of the time, there is zero disagreement between any and all Christian sects. But we've gone to war over it. The 30 Years' War, that was back in the 1600s, that was, and still is, the most destructive war in European history. World War II, that was nothing. World War I, the 30 Years' War more or less depopulated half of Germany. I'm not kidding, wiped out half of Germany. And it was over, well, are you Catholic or are you Lutheran? And a bunch of politics. But we, as Christians, just about killed half of one of the great powers of Europe over, well, who's your guiding star, the Pope or some guy named Luther? That was it. And if we can't sit down with a Lutheran or a Catholic or a Copt and share 95% together, what are we even doing as Christians, right? Now, again, it is somewhat more complicated than that because I don't want to oversimplify. There are important things that are differences, and I'll pick on the Latter-day Saints. They added a whole big book to the Bible. That's a thing. I would argue that some of the Catholic papal stuff is distorting enough. That's a thing. But I'm not going to walk up to some priest or a Jesuit or whoever, or even a Mormon, and go, Jesus, and they're going to go, oh, that guy, he's horrible. No. We're going to be like, yeah, Son of God, Messiah, all good. God, yep, ultimate ruler of the universe. Owe him our allegiance. Yep, owe him our obedience. Yep. Even the big outliers, we're still going to agree most of the time. Because the way this should work is what Matthew, or Jesus, and Paul say of, we're out to pay attention to the God stuff, to the kingdom stuff, that 95% that we agree on with other Christians. And everything else is probably a shibboleth. We probably just do not need to focus on those things that cause irrelevant differences. If you can't like me because I like the Citizens United case, but we're fellow Christians, it's just what are we doing here? Someone is seriously wrong, and my ego demands that it not be me. Though it could be. I'm willing to admit I'm wrong. Frequently. Anyhow, now having said all that, when should we draw distinctions? And there's a time to do it, and the time to do it is the God stuff, is when someone has placed himself in opposition to God in some way or another. And that is a tool you use very carefully. Because remember, the Ephraimites said, you put yourselves, Gileadites, in opposition to God. And they got killed. And that's one of the lessons of the story, is you don't throw that around for fun. It needs to be correct. But we have a story from Galatians. Paul's talking about Peter, and Peter had kind of fallen under the sway of the Judaizers for a bit. And Paul says, when Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he'd stood condemned. Now, Paul is interesting. Paul is, how do you even describe Paul? Paul is very, very aggressive rhetorically. He's kind of the guy who just gets in there and just sinks his teeth into the argument. But he's also very, very loving as a motivation. So it's kind of like a pit bull. Big teeth, but they're called the nursemaid dog because they are the best possible dogs with babies. Paul's the same way. He's kind of a pit bull. He's very, very aggressive, but it's almost just how he talks. It's not because he is actually that emotionally aggressive. It's just he talks very, very strongly. So he opposed Cephas to his face because Cephas stood condemned. For before certain men came from from James, which is almost certainly Jesus' brother. Peter and James are kind of leaders of the church in Jerusalem. Peter used to eat with the Gentiles, but when they arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group, which are the Judaizers. And by the way, the Judaizers, Judaizers, a lot of them were Pharisees. So there's a little bit of a power imbalance. A bunch of judges show up and they form their own breakaway group. A bunch of lawyers are going to defer to the judges. Kind of the same thing here. So the other Jews joined Peter in this hypocrisy. So even Barnabas was led astray. Barnabas is Paul's BFF. He's his wingman on the first missionary journey. And even Barnabas was being led astray. Even someone as powerful in the spirit as Barnabas was going the wrong way. That is the kind of space where we should start drawing distinctions. Is you're not just wrong, but you're wrong in a way that's having negative consequences on the kingdom. Even Barnabas is going into heresy. That's an issue. Even Peter, though, would be a thing. And also, think about Peter has received a direct vision from God about this exact issue. In Acts 10, especially verse 10:28, Peter gets shown the sheet and it has all the unclean animals, and God says, take and eat. And Peter goes back and double checks with God, and God says, no, I really meant it. And then he goes and he witnesses the Gentiles. So Peter's kind of had the direct vision of, no, we're not doing this Jewish law thing anymore. And Peter does fall back into it or defer to the Pharisees, the Judaizers, or just makes the wrong decision. It's not 100% sure what, but he does make the mistake. And so Paul opposes him to his face. He doesn't attack him personally. He doesn't say bad things. He doesn't say you're not really a Christian. He just says you are wrong. And that's what I mean. Paul uses strong words, and Paul's very aggressive rhetorically. He stood condemned. He is really pushing the point, but he's not attacking Peter. And we see this also with Ephraim. Ephraim comes out, crosses the river with an army, which they had no reason to do, to pick a fight again, and they're just being arrogant, treating themselves like they should be in charge. And they're threatening personal reprisals. I'm going to burn down your house around your ears of God's judge. So we see they are in the wrong, and they should be opposed because they're breaking the plan and the structure and the unity that God had planned for the people of Israel. But Jephthah just says, hey, why are you trying to fight? Dude, walk away before you do something really stupid. He absolutely gave them an out. Only when they didn't take it did this actually devolve to a fight. Jephthah never attacked. Jephthah never went after the Ephraimites. He just said, look, here's what you're doing. Here's how it's wrong. Why are you trying to fight me? And when the Ephraimites didn't walk away, well, then bad things happen. So that's the thing to think about is the time to draw a distinction is only when it's a God thing, only when it's in opposition to God, only when we're damaging the kingdom by letting it serve. And also be extremely careful using that, because if I say my children are not cleaning their rooms and cleanliness is next to godliness, and no. That's being way, way, way too loose with this. If it's my lovely children are starting a cult and they're convincing all of you to start worshiping, oh golly, rocks, various rocks in the ground, then, okay, now I should stand in opposition because the kingdom is being diminished by that. And how do we fight? And that's an interesting question too, because we're not in a point in our culture where we can all grab swords and start slaughtering each other over accents, except for Texas. And they can grab weapons, just to be clear. And so how do we do it in this culture, in this time period? And I think it comes from a couple of different places in the Bible. And the first is going to be Ephesians 6, which is the armor of God passage. And multiple times there, Paul says, stand firm. He says, here's this piece of armor. Here's what it symbolizes. Stand firm. Other piece of armor. Here's what it symbolizes. Stand firm. And that's the first thing is just remember we're on the right side. We're the ones who are on God's side. All we have to do is not give in to sin. Second thing is because, as Ephesians 6:12 says, our struggle is not against flesh and blood. we're not going out and having to defend ourselves physically 99% of the time. Most of the time, it's a war of ideas. And you win a war of ideas not always by convincing the person you're opposed to, but convincing the crowd. So let's say, I'm gonna pick on somebody. Let's say Anita and I get in an argument, and Anita's doing something horrible. White sweaters in the summer is just, I don't understand what you're thinking, and we're having a disagreement. I probably won't convince Anita, no matter what I say. But I might convince Gail and Gary. I might convince Emily. I might convince Jerry. So think about not going after the person, but convincing the crowd around. And eventually Anita will come around and start, wearing polo shirts like a responsible human being. And that's the thing that Paul does. Paul is blunt. He's not bothering to be nice about it or to kind of ease in. He just goes straight in. But he's not cruel. He's not unnecessarily argumentative or personal. It's like, dude, you were an apostle. You talked to Jesus, and then you got a miracle, and you still made this mistake. He doesn't do that. He just says, look, here's the rule. You're not following it. You're condemned. We got to fix this thing. And he just lays out the gospel. Just says, look, the word is for everybody. It's not just for Jews. It's not just people who are kind of pseudo-Jews, like the Judaizers wanted. And so that's the first thing, is just stand firm and just don't rely on attacking the person. And the second thing is realize it's not about you. It's not about them. It's about the gospel. And this is why I need to read about that story from the book of Acts. Paul goes to Athens. Athens is Greek central in a lot of ways. If you want to talk about the intellectual and the social world of the Greek world, then Greece is it, and in there, Athens is kind of it too. And he doesn't argue. He doesn't yell. He doesn't fuss and fight. He doesn't go around throwing over idols. He wrangles himself an invitation to talk to everybody. The Areopagus, there we go, was the court of religious inquiry, kind of like are you allowed to talk about this religious thing in the city? He gets an invitation and goes, hey, look, you guys are already worshiping God. Let me share with you exactly how it works, because it's so good. And some of the crowd said, oh yeah, come on back. Let's hear this some more. But he didn't go and be like, let me tell you something about Greek people. Because remember, Paul's a Pharisee. And in the Jewish world, there's good people who are Jews, of whom the best are the Pharisees. And then there's the Greeks, who are just absolutely horrible, immoral, amoral, Las Vegas showgirls, Hollywood, who knows what. That's the Greeks. And he didn't go and be like, let me give you the Pharisee truth of the world, you horrible, evil, amoral, immoral, undermoral people. No, he's like, hey, let me show you the good news. It's good stuff. You'll love it. So he reasons with them. And we actually don't even see the normal Paul level of fire. Now, Paul, remember, he's rhetorically very aggressive. He uses all the tools of rhetoric, all the tools of Greek rhetoric. He's in Greek rhetoric central, and he could just drop the hammer and be like, look how awesome I am while I rip you limb from limb rhetorically. And he doesn't. He actually dials it down because that's not the place to do it. And he didn't make it about him, didn't make it about the Areopagus. He made it about the gospel. And we see the same thing actually in Acts 15, Peter versus the Judaizers. I didn't look long enough, I think, but I don't know exactly when this is relative to, did Peter do this and then backslide and then Paul yelled at him, or did he backslide, Paul yelled at him, and then he did this? But there's a council in Jerusalem about the issue of the Judaizers. Do Christians need to become Jewish first, or as part of being a Christian, circumcision, following the dietary laws, all that jazz? Or is it just the gospel, just the good news, and no Jewishness need to be added in? And Peter and James and the elders are very direct about it. It's in Acts 15, are very direct about it. They say, okay, here's what God says. Here's what we think this means. We do not need to all be circumcised, etc. But they never attack the Judaizers. They never make it personal. It's always about the gospel. Actually, if you read the thing, you realize they're teaching. They're not arguing. They're just saying, look, here's the gospel. And the last thing is that, and this is, I think, the most important thing about when you're fighting, it's not about winning the argument. It's about winning souls. We know from Proverbs, the soft answer turns away wrath. I love Paul. I've said before, Paul's kind of my spirit animal of the apostles. And I don't do this very well because he doesn't do this very well. But you need to not just get stuck in on an argument or get on an issue. And Jephthah gave Ephraim a way out. First thing, hey, why are you fighting? Do you want to back down maybe? This is not going to turn out well. Gideon gave Ephraim a way out. Hey, look, I understand maybe you have a point here, but you've won such a big victory. Can I have my little victory that I didn't invite you to? And the one that all the Ephraimites got killed was the one they didn't take the back out. We also get Romans 12, 17 through 19. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. Note there's no exception there for people you disagree with, or even people who are wrong. Back to the scripture. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. And that's the peace right there. If they're wrong, if they deserve punishment and you want to dish it out to them, that ain't you. God already called that one. Whatever punishment's going to happen, God's in charge of that. Our job as Christians is to save, not to condemn. And even if they're wrong, especially if they're wrong, it's not our job. Because when we take revenge, then we tell those people that's what Christianity is. And they don't want to join us. They don't want to join salvation. If we say, hey, here's the good news. I think you're wrong here, but here's the good news. You want to join the team? Then we're not driving them away. They have a chance for salvation. And that's what we do want. So what does this look like really, really practically? Number one is don't be a jerk. Yeah. She didn't make a spray ball gesture. She should have. Don't be a jerk. The biggest advertisement against Christ, against the church, is Christians. There are some people out there, we are not going to name names, that are the biggest and best advertisement for, boy, you don't want to join us, do you? And a lot of times it's how they act. A lot of times it's I'm going to say love your neighbor, and then I'm going to start throwing trash in my neighbor's yard because I don't like him. Or we're going to say God is the most important thing in my life. Yeah, let me show you this awesome, enormous TV I bought this month. It's bigger than the one from last month. It's a huge thing. And then we get somebody who says, oh, you're wrong. Let me tell you how horrible you are because you're wrong. That person's never coming back, not without an honest-to-goodness miracle. And guess who did that? It wasn't God. It was a Christian who pushed them away. Church of Latter-day Saints, Mormons. By the way, Mormon is a very mild pejorative, like kind of very, very mild N-word, but Latter-day Saints. So try not to use it. But Latter-day Saints is one of the fastest growing Christian denominations in the entire world. Because they are the nicest human beings you will ever interact with. Veronica's helping me move out of my apartment in college. And the day before, we were getting all stuff like boxed up and kind of staged. And 2 Mormon missionaries walked by. Hey, how you doing? Da, da, da. And like we were a little bit surprised they didn't show up the next morning to help us load the truck and drive away. That's how nice they are. And yeah, they're a huge, fast-growing denomination. John talked last week about spiritual fruit. A bunch of spiritual fruit is how you don't be a jerk. Love, kindness, all that stuff. Hey, if you're loving your neighbor, if you're loving somebody you disagree with, you're not being a jerk to them. Because honestly, there are no excuses for scaring or disgusting people away from God. I mean, that is the worst possible thing we could be doing. Second thing is this idea of human tribes don't matter. I mean, we all belong to a lot of tribes. I belong to the tribe of professionals, parents, dads who like dad jokes, people who really like Star Wars, people who are, all these different groups. And every single last one of them is next to nothing compared to the kingdom. That's the most important group that any of us belong to. And if I want to get caught up in well, you don't like the sequel trilogy. Oh, you do like the sequel trilogy. Dude, I am putting Star Wars in front of God. How messed up is that? Can't agree on how good a Star Wars movie is in front of God, which is even worse. So we as people can find all sorts of reasons to fight each other. But we are called to not do that. Remember earlier I said, unless there's an external force, we're going to break into tribes. Can you get an external force bigger than God? I mean, what do you want if God's not enough to force you to do the right thing against your sin nature? And finally, stand firm in defense of God's truth. Arm yourself with Scripture. Don't be afraid to stand on the Word, as long as you're not a jerk about it. But you can be like Paul. Paul is on the extremely aggressive side. He's one goalpost. Apostle John, we very much love your brothers, but he's also, and let me tell you about Gnosticism, which is really, really wrong, is your other end. But somewhere in the middle between aggressive rhetoric but loving spirit and loving rhetoric but aggressive spirit, you need to just be somewhere in here. Wherever you personally fall, as long as you're not a jerk about it, that's how you stand. And yeah, I should put the end on my notes so I know when I'm actually done. But that's the story of Judges here. The last thing is how Judges ends. And I want to say real fast, which Judges is a tragedy. Judges is about the people of Israel getting worse and worse and worse and worse until the only thing they could do to fix it is to do a thing that God didn't want them to do, which was get a king. And then that turned out horribly until we finally got the right person for a king. And then 2 generations later, that went horribly. And I want you to just think about earlier, we're living in kind of a judgy time. Think of how this sounds to you. The last 2 verses of Judges, chapter 21, verses 24 to 25. In that time, the Israelites left that place and went home to their tribes and clans, each to his own. In these days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. That's the world we live in. I mean, just walk down the street anywhere in the United States. Everyone in their own little tribe, own little clan, their own little inheritance or land, and we idolize, literally idolize, doing as you see fit. We know that's the wrong way. And through Judges, we've been given the tools and the mindset to work against that. Just don't be a jerk about it. Let's end with a prayer, and then the Lord's Prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for giving us stories that are thousands of years old, thousands of years before we even knew we would need them. Thank you for the lessons in this, and also thank you for the examples you've given us, the biblical examples and the people that we know and we look up to. Help us to keep focused on you and not on the little things that do divide us. Now, as you taught us to pray, Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen.